Hi friends, and welcome back to another video. So today I wanted to go into all of my thoughts on the Fiery Cross. So the first section is going to be spoiler-free thoughts and overall views, and then I'm going to have a spoiler-filled section. Alright, and if you see me looking down in this video at all, it's because I'm looking at my notebook, because I took a lot of notes. It's been a while since I've read this book, so I just wanted to take some notes. But I want to say that this book is definitely my least favorite in the book series so far. As of the 9th book, this book is just not holding up to any of the other ones. I think that it's kind of a long slog, and especially the first 200-300 pages were very boring, and it takes place all on this no good terrible day that Diana talks about, and I just honestly struggled with this one, especially with the very beginning like I mentioned, but just throughout I did not feel as connected to the characters. I didn't feel connected to the storylines in this one. It felt like there were just a lot of things that were left unfinished in this one, and I really didn't appreciate that about the Fiery Cross. I feel like all the books up to this point had very much a self-contained plot. They had a beginning, middle, and end, and this one was just kind of one of the first books that gave you an episodic view into kind of this period of their life rather than having a full plot within itself. And I think that this one does probably the worst job at that, so I did not personally love it that much. There were a few things I did like about it, but I know so many people stop reading the series with this book because they just find it too difficult to get through. I definitely say that if you want to read this series, kind of skim through this book. There's a lot of things that you can just probably find online about the book, or you can watch this video and get all of the plot summary in this, and then you don't have to read it yourself, so you can skip on to the next book. Because I will say A Breath of Snow and Ashes is one of my favorites in the series, and it's the book following this one, and the one right before this is also one of my favorites. So it was so disappointing that it was sandwiched by this book that I just really didn't like, and that most people in the fandom just really don't vibe with or like at all. But mentioning some of the things that I did like in this book, I like that we got some more development between Bree and Roger in this one. They are apart most of Drums of Autumn, and we've only seen them in snippets in Dragonfly and Amber and Voyager up to this point. So this is the first book where they're really together, and we really get to see more of their dynamics play out rather than just a few scenes. And I like that the story is all concentrated back into a single timeline. I feel like when they have too many different timelines going on, it starts to get a little bit too convoluted in my personal opinion. So I like that they're all in the same timeline. I appreciate that Bree, Roger, and Jamie and Claire are all together on the Ridge, and we see that the Ridge is really being fully established here, and there's a lot of people that have settled. So I like that the family is feeling a little bit more stable and settled in this one, despite all of the things that are to come and all the things that happen in this book. So we have that aspect going on, which I appreciate. I just appreciate all the bonding moments in this one. There's a lot of subtle moments between Jamie and Roger as well, where we see their relationship begin to develop, especially after all the events of Drums of Autumn. They have a long way to go, and this is the first step in developing a better relationship in this one. So I will say, if you want to try this one, definitely proceed with caution. I don't know that it will be to everyone's taste. There's a lot of details in here about Claire's medical practice and all the things that she's trying to do. They are grappling with a lot of different things about their mortality as Claire and Jamie are starting to get a little bit older in this one, and some of those things are just not the most exciting scenes. If you want a more action-packed and exciting book, definitely do not recommend this one in the series. But just those are some of my overall thoughts and feelings on this, and just some of my initial feelings kind of going over this book, and just wanted to share those with you guys. Alright, so those are all of my initial spoiler-free thoughts. I'm gonna give you all of my overall thoughts at the end, but the next section is going to be spoiler-filled, so I will leave a timestamp down below letting you know when the spoiler-filled discussion starts and when it ends. And I will also leave somewhere on the screen, I don't know where exactly, but I will leave a little disclaimer that's saying whether it's a spoiler-free discussion part or spoiler-filled discussion. So this is your warning. Please be forewarned. If you do not want to be spoiled for this book, do not proceed ahead. But if you don't mind being spoiled, or if you've watched the TV show and just want to see how it compares, you can definitely keep on going. Alright, so the Fiery Cross kind of picks up where we left off at the end of Drums of Autumn. We are in October of 1770, and we pick up at the gathering at Mount Helicon, and Jamie is ordered by Governor Tryon to form a militia, and this is going to happen because there have been some riots that have occurred recently, and so he wants a militia to kind of put it down. This is going to be the beginning of what will be called the War of the Regulation. So this is kind of a rebellion that happens before the Revolutionary War, so we're definitely in the lead up to that and ramping up, and oh boy, you can definitely feel that trouble is a brewing in this one. And also in October of 1770, we see that more are Ardsmuir men are starting to settle at the Ridge. The Ridge is starting to feel a lot more established in this one, and Jamie ends up taking on Arch and Merdina Bug as servants to help him at the Ridge, especially because if a lot of the men have to end up leaving for this militia, they need people still around to run the farm and everything. So he wants Archbug to kind of be the factor and Merdina Bug to be a household servant. And I just have super complicated feelings on the bugs. We definitely will go on a crazy and unexpected journey with them. I will say a lot of the crazy things that happen with them don't really happen in the Fiery Cross, and that's kind of part of why they are just not my favorites in this book. I mean, they're not my favorites in general, but wow, did they add to the plot later on. I will say they play a bigger role in A Breath of Snow and Ashes and An Echo in the Bone, the next couple of books in this series. But in this one, we're just getting set up with them and we are starting to build some trust with them. So we will see where that goes. And we also get introduced to Josiah Beardsley, who he is a very good hunter, and Jamie wants him to come to live at the Ridge so he can hunt and help provide for the Ridge when the militia is gone. Obviously, they need men to still hunt, and since Josiah is too young to be the militia, he would be an asset to the Ridge to provide for them and make sure that they can survive the harsh winters. And he will become a more important character in the next book and in the next couple books actually, but especially in A Breath of Snow and Ashes. And I will say that I'm pretty flabbergasted by where his storylines kind of go in some of those future books. So definitely another character that I appreciated getting established in this book. But as we see, a lot of the Fiery Cross is kind of introducing us to new characters and establishing what their role might be, and then challenging these roles in later books. So we get a lot of setup in this book without a lot of the carry out or the action happening. Also, Jocasta Cameron tells Roger that she is going to leave her wealth to Jem. She is doing this because she wants to encourage him to take care of Jem, and obviously Roger feels offended by this because he's like, I'm gonna take care of Jem no matter what. We don't need your money, we don't want your money at all, and like, how dare you insinuate that I wouldn't take care of Jem like my own son. And this is obviously pleasing to Jocasta but offensive to Brianna and Roger. And we see that Jem, Germain, and Joan, and Germain and Joan are Fergus and Marsley's children, are being baptized in secret by a Catholic priest after he is arrested. And all of these events are happening on that no good, long, terrible day that I mentioned at the beginning in the spoiler-free section. So Brianna and Roger end up having to be married by a Protestant minister when originally they were going to be married by a Catholic priest. But Jocasta and Duncan agree that they will wait to be married for a Catholic priest. And we also have the infamous calling of the clans scene in this, with Jamie declaring the presence of the Frasers of the Ridge. I absolutely love this. I think this is my favorite scene of this entire sequence, and possibly my favorite scene of this entire book, to be honest. I just had chills reading this scene, and it was very moving to me, and I felt so many of my emotions being stirred. You can really see how proud he is of his family, and you know that they're going to stand together in the hard times that are to come. So then we move on to November of 1770, and I skipped over a lot of things that happened in that no good, long, terrible day, but so many of them were just not important and don't affect a lot later on. But we do see in November that Jamie and Claire end up adopting a cat, and they name him Adzo, and he's super cute. I wish we had some more scenes with him in the books, but I love that they're gonna have this pet. He is such a cutie. At the same time, Jamie is being called to raise a militia, and he is going to be told to join his militia with the rest of the regiment in December. So things are heating up with the War of the Regulation, and we start to see that things are going to be happening from here. There are going to be some possible battles coming up, we will see. And he is going to build the Fiery Cross. And the Fiery Cross, which is the title of this book, is an old Highland tradition. So basically, when the men are getting ready to go off to war, or they're getting ready to fight in a battle or something, they build and light the Fiery Cross to let all the men of the land know, so that all the clansmen are able to gather together. And he's going to begin gathering his men. Moving on to December of 1770, we see that Fraser's militia is setting out, and we meet Josiah Beardsley's deaf twin brother, Kezzy Beardsley, and he will be important later on as well. And we see that Roger and the men are going to head to Brownsville to recruit other men to add to the militia. Meanwhile, Claire and Jamie are going to go to the Beardsleys trading post because Kezzy and Josiah Beardsley are indentured servants to the Beardsleys there, and they want to get them freed, obviously, so that they are just free to live at the Ridge and there is no repercussions of the Beardsleys coming back to reclaim them. And we have a very interesting sequence and a very interesting interaction at the Beardsleys. We see that Aaron Beardsley has had a stroke, and it's quite horrific seeing all those scenes, to be honest. In the TV show, it's so graphic as well, and honestly, it was quite disturbing to see how Fanny had kind of been mistreating her husband, but he had been super abusive to her before he had his stroke. So it's like, who was worse, to be honest? Fanny is just kind of retaliating for all of the negative things that happened to her, but just so disturbing to see. And she ends up leaving with Claire and Jamie from around the trading post because Aaron Beardsley ends up dying, and we see that Jamie ends up mercy killing him because this dude is in so much pain and he's never going to recover from his condition. It was just so horrifying reading this. Like I said, I was in equal measures feeling empathy for Fanny Beardsley and disgust, and I kind of felt that for both of them, to be honest. And the descriptions were very intense and not for the faint of heart at all. Meanwhile, we see that Roger and Fergus are facing some trouble in Brownsville when the men there want to kill one of the men in the militia, Isaiah Morton, because he was intimate with Alicia Brown, one of the Brown people. And it was very intense reading this. I was concerned that there was going to be a full-on just fight going to break out here, but luckily Roger and Fergus are able to diffuse the situation enough that that does not happen. And we also see that the militia ends up getting disbanded by Tryon, and the Frasers end up returning to the Ridge for now, but the militia is disbanded because the unrest has kind of settled and there isn't as much chaos going on in the backcountry. At the end of all of this, Isaiah commits bigamy and he elopes with Alicia Brown after finding out she's pregnant. He had previously been married and he is still married at this point, but he ends up abandoning his wife for Alicia and they run off into the sunset basically. And this will not be the last that we see of Isaiah Morton, sadly. So then we move into the next year. It's January of 1771 and the Beardsley twins have finally come to live on the Ridge, and Claire has to perform tonsillectomies on both of them because they have very enlarged tonsils. And very exciting news for her medical developments in the 18th century. She is able to finally produce a batch of penicillin in this one, and we see her first administering it with the Beardsley twins. Obviously, we don't know how effective it's gonna be because this is her first batch and there's no clear way of testing the effectiveness of it in this time period, but it is exciting to see that Claire is able to replicate this modern medical advancement in the 1770s. And I love seeing this first step in her trying to improve the lives and the healthcare of people living in this time. Later on in March of this year, we see that the Frasers are attending Jocasta's wedding at River Run, and we come across Philip Wiley again. Do you remember him from Drums of Autumn? He is a slime ball, and he continues to be one in this book. He tries to seduce Claire, and she refuses him, but he tries to be very insistent. He does not rape her, but he really tries. And Bree and Jamie find a slave named Betty, who is drunk under the bushes, and we find out that she ended up being drugged with laudanum, and that the drink obviously wasn't for her, it was meant for someone else. But we don't know who the target for this drugging was, so we definitely have to figure out that. And a series of events continue and ensue from this that are absolutely wild. Duncan tells Jamie that he thinks he is impotent and asks Claire if she will speak to Jocasta about it because obviously this could affect their marriage, and if they end up getting married anyway. They still end up getting married and Jocasta is kind of okay with it. She isn't marrying him to be intimate, she is marrying him for kind of the security of having a man defend her in River Run and kind of protect her interests there. And we see that Wiley ends up getting Jamie to join him in a high-stake game of cards, and this is very frustrating for Claire. Jamie ends up asking Claire for Frank's gold ring, which was really offensive, and I don't think that he should have done this. And she angrily ends up giving him both of her rings, but Jamie luckily wins the game and doesn't lose either of the rings. This was definitely not good, like I said, and Jamie should not have let his jealousy get the better of him in this situation, but I kind of understand it because Wiley was just such a slime ball. It was still inconsiderate of him to ask for Frank's ring, especially. Like, way to disrespect the first marriage that Claire had definitely kind of causes a rift between the two of them for a little bit. We also see that Betty is found dead, so she is that slave that was earlier drugged, and Claire performs an autopsy on her to try to figure out what causes her death, but she and Jamie are interrupted by Philip Wiley, and they also end up having a run-in with Stephen Bonnet. Now, I mentioned in the last book that he was going to just keep on appearing in this book and the next book, and boy is that true. This is our first run-in with him in this book, but it's not going to be the last one. There's definitely some issues that we're going to have with him later on, but we see throughout the book that he will be a looming threat, and I feel like at the end of it, the storyline gets to be a little bit dragged out, just in my personal opinion. So we learn that Jocasta and Duncan were attacked by two men. It is assumed that these men were Bonnet and Wiley, and they are interrogated about where the Stuart gold was hidden, as this was money that was meant to support the Scottish uprising, but obviously the uprising failed before the gold got into the Bonnie Prince's hands. So we see Roger and Jamie interrogate Wiley, but they find out little from him, and they determine that he wasn't really affiliated with this situation with Bonnet at all. And the family comes to the conclusion that Betty was accidentally killed by Lieutenant Wolfe, who was trying to kill Duncan because he was jealous of the fact that Duncan was married to Jocasta, because all of his advances to Jocasta were kind of rejected, so he's jealous of all that. And they believe that he was actually the second man involved in the attack. The Frasers end up returning to the Ridge, and Jamie receives orders that the militia will be asked to be reassembled before April 20th, So we really see that things again are heating up with the War of the Regulation, and there's a lot of unfinished ties left with River Run, so we're gonna see what happens with that shortly. In April of 1771, Fraser's company ends up leaving to join their regiment. We get an unnerving feeling about this, and again you can feel this looming threat of war is coming and it's bearing down on their shoulders. And in May of 1771 we have the first battle. This is the Battle of the Alamance, and this is a very emotionally distressing one. Roger is asked to cross enemy lines, and he tries to get Herman Husband, who is one of the leaders of the Regulators, to stand down and try to negotiate. And as Roger's leaving, he comes across Morag Mackenzie again. This is his several times great-grandmother who he met in Drums of Autumn, and he saved her life and her son's life when they were almost thrown overboard on Stephen Bonnet's ship to America. He ends up kissing her, which is like, ew, gross. Roger, why are you doing this? What were you thinking, honestly? And I was just disturbed by this unnecessary behavior on his behalf. And Buck Mackenzie, Morag's husband, ends up seeing this, and so he decides he's gonna turn Roger into the militia and claim he was a regulator. Roger is then hanged. He's one of like 2 or 3 people chosen to do this, and he barely survives the hanging, and he is going to have a long-lasting vocal injury from this. And that's why I mentioned in Drums of Autumn that it was nice to see that he was using his singing voice in that one, especially because his voice will never be the same after this book. So it was nice to see how it was when it was still working well, but after this it's just never gonna be the same. Honestly, reading this sequence was super traumatic, and I was horrified. The hanging was quite graphic and distressing in both the book and in the TV series, I would say, and I just felt so bad for Roger, but he kind of had it coming. Like, what are you doing with your great-grandmother? That's really weird. And for a moment I really thought that he died in this one. Like, you are left on the edge of your seat and you're thinking, is this man dead? We also see that the Brown brothers ended up shooting Isaiah Morton during the battle, but Claire is able to save his life, luckily. And like, what a shitty thing of them to do in the midst of this battle to kind of go after him, but knew it was coming. They were not finished with him, and it definitely was distressing to see, but expected. So we move on to June 1771, and Jamie and Claire are kind of discussing that they are going to need to sell a gem for funds that they need, because Jamie still has to pay alimony to Leary Mackenzie. He owes her money because their marriage was annulled, but obviously because of all the disgrace of that and just all the humiliation he puts her through, he agrees that he's going to pay her alimony. And then we move on to August of 1771, and we see that an astrolabe has arrived from Lord John Grey in care of William Ransom, his son. This is the first that we see of William in the books after his appearance in Drums of Autumn, but he's starting to become more of a teenager now and less of a child. In Drums, he was still kind of young, so he didn't play a big role, but this is a precursor and foreshadowing for the larger role that William will play in some of the later books. And I think it's interesting that he's the one that ends up sending this to the Frasers. We also see that Brianna ends up having to deal with this odious man called Obadiah Henderson, and he is trying to seduce her. So she asks for Jamie's help in trying to deal with him because Roger has been very busy, and this is just an awkward situation, and I really felt for Bri in this. It was really repulsive seeing this man kind of trying to thrust himself on her, especially when he is trying so hard to sleep with her and Bri is not encouraging him at all, and she's really dissuading him very hard. I was really disgusted by his advances, and I knew this is something that kind of happened in this time period, but it was disgusting to see play out. We also see that Roger ends up using Jamie's astrolabe to survey the land and to survey all of Fraser's Ridge in order to safeguard it. They want to know the extent of their land and all of that it encompasses in order to make sure that it's protected in the future chaos of the Revolutionary War. We also see that Peter Bewley and his brother-in-law end up seeking Jamie's help in dealing with a ghost bear who has been attacking a native village, and lightning ends up striking the village and the wildfire spreads through the back country. All of this storyline, all this plot with the native village and surveying the land was kind of boring. It was like in the middle of the book, kind of dull, and I just didn't love it. And we see that Roger comes across some escaped slaves, and we've come across Fanny Beardsley again, who we saw leave her newborn daughter, abandon her with Jamie and Claire earlier in the book. This is an unexpected cameo, especially after how things left off with Fanny and the Beardsleys earlier on, and I appreciated that it gave some closure to the storyline, but it just felt a little awkward and out of place. So then we move on to October of 1771, and Roger returns to the Ridge, and we see that Claire and Jamie are kind of discussing the future and their mortality. Like I said, in this book there is a lot of contemplation of the future, but also the fact that Claire and Jamie are getting older. Like, they're not gonna live forever, and they're trying to figure out what's going to happen to their kids after that. And we see that Bri ends up having a nightmare about Stephen Bonnet. Like I said, he is a looming threat, and he is appearing again and again in this. We have this dream that Bri has where she fears that Bonnet is going to try to kidnap Jem, and he will continue showing up throughout this book and A Breath of Snow and Ashes. He's kind of always a threat that is out there, and he creates an eerie atmosphere throughout the whole story. We feel his presence, even if we're we're not actively thinking about him, we know that he's out there around any corner looming. Roger also ends up asking Jamie to teach him how to fight because he wants to be prepared for when they do eventually have an interaction with Bonnet again and to kind of deal with him once and for all. In November of 1771, Jamie ends up being bitten by a venomous snake while hunting, and he almost dies from this wound. Jamie is like a cat with 9 lives, but at this point he's got like 4 lives left. I don't even know. They do make a reference to it in one of the books that he has like had so many near-death experiences that one of them will end up killing him one of these days, but not today. Roger ends up learning about how to run the ridge in case Jamie dies and how to protect them all and survive, and Fergus helps Roger get Jamie back to Claire so she can treat him. Bree ends up killing a wounded buffalo with an axe when it comes near to Jem, and Claire cuts its throat with a saw. Again, so many near-death experiences in this one sequence, it's a little bit unnerving. Bree ends up creating a syringe for Claire from the tooth of a rattlesnake, and she uses this to inject penicillin into Jamie's leg in order to fight off the effects of the poison and to fight the infection that is growing there from the venom. And I love that Bree is able to use her engineering mind in this way to help Jamie and Claire. It's definitely something that I want to see more of in the upcoming books, and I love that she had a purpose outside of just taking care of her family, of taking care of Roger and young Jem, and this was just absolutely delightful to see. Roger ends up allowing Tom Christie, another Ardmere man, to settle on the ridge with his son Alan and his daughter Malva, and boy is there going to be some drama with the 3 of them in the upcoming book. Just you wait. And he agrees that he's also going to be the schoolmaster for the kids on the ridge for 5 months out of the year. But wow, we are going to see a lot of craziness with the Christies. They are going to play a very big role in A Breath of Snow and Ashes, and Roger kind of does this without Jamie's permission, so we will have to see what the repercussions are through the next book, and they are going to be the representation of chaos in the next book. All right, so then we move on to 1772, and the Frasers are making a plan to go to Wilmington and meet with Stephen Bonnet to finally deal with him and the threat that he's continuing to pose to the family, and this plan fails. Stephen Bonnet kind of catches wind of what they're planning to do, and he kind of reverses the table on them, and they end up having to deal with Randall Lillywhite and David Anstruther, 2 men who were sent to kind of detain them and keep them busy, and it leads to an entire chaotic sequence following with these Russian imported animals, and so many things happen. It's a little bit confusing, to be honest, but we do see that it's all meant to be a ruse and a distraction from Bonnet's true plans for this time. Meanwhile, in Wilmington, Claire and Bree and Marsley are approached by Stephen Bonnet. Bonnet tries to kidnap Jem because he mistakenly thinks that Jem is his son, and he also tries to kidnap Bree. Throughout the whole book, I was just waiting for something like this to happen. I know we had that earlier scene at Riverrun, but that was just kind of a near miss. But this is an actual interaction with Bonnet, and this whole scene, I was on the edge of my seat. I was afraid for young Jem the entire time, and I desperately felt my hatred for this man bubbling up in this book, especially in this sequence. And we really see that he is going to continue being a threat to their lives. Bree actually ends up shooting Stephen Bonnet in the groin, but he escapes. And I kind of had mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, I thought that it was kind of a girl boss moment for Bree to end up shooting him. It's a little bit of revenge for the fact that he raped her and abused her, but I hate that Bonnet is able to escape. Like, this is definitely where I wanted the storyline with him to end, and I feel like it was a missed opportunity of Diana to just kind of wrap this up, and it's definitely not going to be the last that we see of him, unfortunately. I will say this is one of my biggest frustrations with this book. It's the lack of resolution of the Bonnet storyline and how it gets dragged out to A Breath of Snow and Ashes. I think maybe if that had been resolved in here, I wouldn't have disliked this one as strongly, but you never know how it's gonna play out, and I was just feeling very frustrated at this point with him. I was kind of over it and ready to be done. So then we get to May of 1772, and Roger is reading Bree's dream diary, which again feels a little bit like an invasion of privacy to me, but Bree doesn't end up minding too much, and she actually ends up asking him about his own dreams. And this is kind of a heartwarming bonding moment that we see between Roger and Bree. Like I said, we don't get a lot of these in Drums of Autumn, so it's good to see some more of these in The Fiery Cross. And I just feel like it helps me feel closer to them and feel more connected and attached to both of them, which is important because they're gonna play bigger roles as the series continues. So I like that we get a lot of them in this book. In July of 1772, Claire noted in her casebook about the death of a woman called Rosamond Lindsay, and she ends up debating about whether she should write about the true reason for her death, which was anaphylaxis. Again, this seems like a small moment, but it will prove to be important later on because Claire's healing skills are always viewed with a level of suspicion, and if she's writing all these things in this casebook, people are gonna be like she's a witch and she's practicing witchcraft and all of that. So definitely something to be aware of and be wary of, and Claire has to be very careful what she writes in her casebooks and stuff because she doesn't know who will end up reading them. Hint, hint, it will lead to some trouble for her later on. So we move on to September of 1772, and we're nearing the end of the story at this point, and we see that young Ian is returning to the bridge. This is the first that we've seen of him since Drums of Autumn, as he's been living with the Mohawk, and he really won't share anything of his experiences there, so it leads us to wonder what ended up happening with them and why he has returned. I was excited to have Ian back in the narrative, but I knew that he had a lot of unresolved issues from his time with the Mohawk, and I know that that's something that we're going to explore more in A Breath of Snow and Ashes and in An Echo in the Bone, the next couple of books in the series. He also ends up giving Claire Ottertooth, or Robert Springer's notebook, and Claire, Bree, and Roger end up telling him that they are from the future, and it's like finally they tell him this. It was about time, especially since he's viewed as such a beloved member of the family. Like, I felt like Ian just needed to know at this point. It was kind of dragging out a little bit not telling him, and I was glad that they finally confided in him, especially because Ian has proven that he is trustworthy. He is a man of worth. He traded his freedom to save Roger from the Mohawk, so definitely something that I appreciated. Also, the final sequence that we see is Jem accidentally explodes a opal, and he does this by holding it, which kind of leads us to think that he might be able to time travel because he's got this ability with the stones, just like Claire, Roger, and Brianna. And this leaves us with a cliffhanger because we wonder what's going to happen. Are they going to be traveling forward into the future? What is going to be the plans for Bree, Roger, and Jem going forward? And it definitely piqued my curiosity about how all the time travel stuff exactly works, especially since we don't really know too much about it, and why Jem's powers seem to be more intense than the rest of the family's powers. Like, why does he explode the opal where the others just feel like it's warm? And I definitely want to know more about the lore of that. I know we get a little bit more of it in A Breath of Snow and Ashes, but not really there. We get some more of it, I would say, in An Echo in the Bone specifically, and Written in My Own Heart's Blood, but there's still so many questions left unanswered about it that I definitely want to see explored more in Go Till the Bees That I'm Gone and the final book to come. So those are all of my spoiler-filled thoughts for The Fiery Cross. Now I'm gonna go into just all of my overall thoughts on the book. Like I mentioned before, it's not my favorite in the series. It's probably my least favorite, but I did like that Marcy and Fergus had a bigger role to play in this one. I think that Diana kind of forgets about them in Drums of Autumn, but she does a good job of kind of incorporating them at least a little bit in this one, which I think she kind of fails to do in some of the other books. They do get occasional appearances, but they will never be like main characters again like they were in Voyager, which I felt like was a lost opportunity and kind of a shame. I just feel like Diana at this point has so many characters that she doesn't even know what to do with all of them, that she kind of ignores some in the narrative, and as she brings some forward and more prominent into the narrative, others kind of fade into the background, and that's what happens in this one. We also see the growing presence of Lord John Grey and William in this book. They don't appear in this book at all, so this is probably the only book since like maybe even Dragonfly and Amber that Lord John Grey does not appear in the series. He makes at least one appearance in all the rest of the books, but he doesn't show up in this one, which was a shame. In the TV series, I know he makes a few cameos because obviously they don't want the actor just on the sidelines the entire time, but I was definitely missing his presence in this one. And you definitely get to feel more curious about certain things, like you want to know more about who William is becoming, the person he's evolving into, and also there's so many unanswered questions about the time traveling abilities of Claire, Roger, and Bree, and possibly Jem in this one. So very interesting, and I want to see more about that. We see that Claire and Jamie's relationship is stronger than ever, just like in Drums of Autumn. They are fully reconnected, and I love just their bond and how much they will go to the ends of the earth to take care of each other. We also get to see a lot more of Roger and Bree in this book, and I love seeing that relationship develop more, and we see that they're truly committed to each other in this book in a way that they really haven't been up to this point. So it's really their journey of becoming closer and always choosing each other in spite of all the things that have happened, so I appreciated seeing that in this one. I love some of the tertiary or like side relationships also developing in this book. We see that relations between Roger and Jamie are starting to thaw out a little bit in this one, which I appreciated, and I think that this book is a lot of character development. If I would describe it as something, it'd be just a lot of character growth and development as we're getting ready for all the action to come in the next couple of books, and some of it just felt a little bit slow in my opinion. We also kind of see that Jocasta and Duncan are still important in this book, but not as much as in Drums of Autumn, and they're slowly being phased out. It's like I mentioned, Diana likes to phase in some characters and phase out some characters depending on their relevance to the storyline, and they're just not contributing as much, so she's kind of like phasing them out in this book, but they definitely do have some important moments. We get more development from Stephen Bonnet, but like I said before, I was frustrated that the storyline wasn't resolved here, and we just get so much anticipation for the Revolutionary War. We see the entirety of the War of the Regulation in this one, which was kind of interesting to read about, but just isn't going to be as exciting as the actual war will be. So I was just eagerly awaiting it, and it's felt like there's been so much building suspense that something has got to give soon. We'll definitely see that start to happen in the next book. So we've been amping up for so long that we need to see some action kind of carry out. Overall, I just don't think this is my favorite in the series. This is one that I probably will never reread fully. I think there are bits and scenes in this one that I like that I will reread, like the scene of the clan calling or some of those smaller scenes. But the overall narrative of this one just felt very lackluster in my personal opinion. I definitely think this is one you can just look up a summary about or watch my video on and skip on by to continue on to the next book because it just didn't feel worthwhile. This is also quite possibly the longest or one of the longest books in the series, and it just didn't feel worth all the time that it took to read over the 1,000 pages of this book. All right, so those are all of my general thoughts and feelings on The Fiery Cross by Diana Gabaldon. Like I said before, this is the 5th book in the Outlander series. If you've read this book or if you've seen the TV show, I'd absolutely love to know what you think of this book and what you think of the TV series as well. Did you like some of the changes made in the TV series, or do you wish it had stuck more closely to the book? I'd definitely love to know your thoughts. My personal opinion is that I appreciated that they cut out a lot of the boring things from the book and just kept the most important aspects. And I am glad that I've gotten to the end of this book, and we're going to be talking about a much more exciting book next time. So if you like this video, give it a like, comment, and subscribe. And if you've made it to this point in the video, you can send me like a little fire emoji down below. I'd absolutely love to see that. And I just want to say a big thank you if you made it to this point. I appreciate everybody that watches my videos. And I just want to say also that wherever you're in the world, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, I hope that you are doing well. And hopefully I will see you for the next one. Bye!